Всем привет!
Hello everyone. What a wonderful time we live in. A third of the food produced in the world goes to the dump. Fashion houses burn unsold clothing worth billions of dollars. The car manufacturers store their products that have not found demand just under the open sky. Tens of thousands of cars have been rotting in these parking lots for years, polluting the environment, demonstrating to the whole world such typical touches to the portrait of our old friend, modern capitalism. The problem of overproduction is a constant companion of the market economy and a unique feature of capitalism. Indeed, in the pre-market era, the source of human misery was a lack of goods. Natural disasters such as droughts, locust invasions, floods caused famine and mass extinction. Under capitalism, the cause of poverty and human suffering is an overabundance of goods. Millions of people go hungry because too much grain has been produced. People suffer from the cold because too much coal has been mined. But this overabundance is of course relative. Overproduction does not at all mean that the volume of the produced goods exceeds human needs. It only turns out to be more than the effective demand. In this case, an absurd situation arises: the mass of produced and unsold goods on the one side and millions of destitute people on the other. There are plenty of examples in history. Take the crisis events of the late 1920s and early 1930s in the United States, known as the Great Depression. It was caused by overproduction, which arose as a result of the general euphoria against the background of high rates of economic growth in previous years. The rate of production outpaced the growth of incomes of the population. As a result, warehouses were filled with unsold goods, and businesses began to go bankrupt. This caused massive unemployment and further exacerbated the crisis to an even greater degree. The market economy was caught in a vicious circle. People do not buy goods because they have no work, and they have no work because the goods they produce are not bought. On the 7th of March 1932, a rally of starving citizens was held in Detroit, making economic demands. But instead of food, the workers received bullets. The police and the Henry IV Security Service opened fire on the protesters. 5 people were killed and dozens were injured. In total, during the years of the crisis, millions of people became victims of hunger. Handing out unclaimed food to the poor would be the only sensible solution in such a situation, but it does not fit into the logic of the market. To distribute the excess goods for free means to lower the prices of products and lose the main thing, that is, profit. In addition, such a move would reduce the demand for jobs and raise the price of labor. Capitalism found a cannibalistic way out of that situation. Producers simply began to destroy stocks of goods. Fields with wheat crops were plowed, fruits were burned, and millions of cattle were sent to slaughter. The American author John Steinbeck, in the novel The Grapes of Wrath, wrote, "The works of the roots of the vines, of the trees, must be destroyed to keep up the price, and this is the saddest, bitterest thing of all. Carloads of oranges dumped on the ground. The people came for miles to take the fruit, but this could not be. How would they buy oranges at 20 cents a dozen if they could drive out and pick them up? And men with those hoses squirt kerosene on the oranges, and they are angry at the crime, angry at the people who have come to take the fruit. 1 million people hungry needing the fruit. And kerosene sprayed over the golden mountains, and the smell of rot fills the country. Burn coffee for fuel in the ships. Burn corn to keep warm, it makes a hot fire. Dump potatoes in the rivers and place guards along the banks to keep the hungry people from fishing them out. Slaughter the pigs and bury them, and let the putrescence drip down into the earth. There is a crime here that goes beyond denunciation. There is a sorrow here that weeping cannot symbolize. There is a failure here that topples all our successes. The fertile earth, the straight tree rows, the sturdy trunks, and the ripe fruit. And the children dying of pellagra must die because a profit cannot be taken from an orange. And coroners must fill a certificate, died of malnutrition, because the food must rot, must be forced to rot. The people come with nets to fish for potatoes in the river, and the guards hold them back. They come in rattling cars to get the dumped oranges, but the kerosene is sprayed. And they stand still and watch the potatoes float by. Listen to the screaming pigs being killed in a ditch and covered with quicklime. Watch the mountains of oranges slop down to a putrefying ooze. And in the eyes of the people there is the failure. And in the eyes of the hungry there is a growing wrath. In the souls of the people the grapes of wrath are filling and growing heavy for the vintage. The Great Depression is long gone, but the problem of overproduction is still there. Take the global economic crisis in 2008. It is usually called financial because it was accompanied by large-scale shocks in the stock markets. However, it is not difficult to find the same problems of overproduction in it. For example, back in 2005, in times of the rapid growth of the American economy, the largest car manufacturer, General Motors, showed the record loss of $10.5 billion. Other major automakers of the country, Chrysler and Ford, also faced similar difficulties. But can we say that the production of cars has exceeded the global need for them? No, it has only exceeded the effective demand. In the USA, there are 797 cars per 1,000 people, in Italy 625, in Russia 373, in Burkina Faso 11, in Bangladesh 2. In most countries of the world, the transport problem remains unsolved. However, effective demand is concentrated not in Russia and Bangladesh, but in the countries of the so-called Golden Billion, where the need for cars has already been largely satisfied. In the US economy as a whole, during the period of economic recovery in 2002-2007, the level of capacity utilization increased from 72% to 80%. At the same time, real household incomes fell from 60.8 thousand to 58.7 thousand per year. Under these conditions, consumer spending was supported by lending. Overall economic growth, the spread of lending, and the rush demand for housing acted to raise the property prices. The total cost of homes in the 10 years preceding the crisis doubled. People got a chance to use their real estate to refinance their debts. The rapid development of housing construction, which was stimulated by easy access to loans, further accelerated the growth of prices. This in turn became the basis for further borrowings to buy homes and consumer goods. This speculative spiral ended in 2007, when the skyrocketing prices of new housing became prohibitive for a large part of ordinary Americans. Debtors with high-risk loans, mostly people with low incomes, were the first to be hit, as they became involved in mortgage schemes with heavy monthly payments. The unemployment that followed the crisis only made this effect more dramatic. Millions of families got the key of the street for debt. At the height of the crisis, in 2011, there were 3.5 million homeless people in the United States, while 18.5 million houses were empty. These examples are just the most striking, glaring episodes of capitalist crisis. In the history of capitalism, they occur regularly, thus forming a cyclical nature of market development. However, despite the abundance of empirical data, there are still those who completely deny the problem of overproduction as an integral feature of the market. These are mainly the most radical representatives of the liberal wing of economic science. In their understanding, the market system is the guarantor of the efficient allocation of resources, and the overproduction of goods in it is simply impossible. Such arguments ultimately boil down to the so-called Say's law, named after the French political economist who wrote his works in the early 19th century. The law states that aggregate demand and aggregate supply are always equal, or, in other words, the value of the goods produced is equal to the total income of all participants in production, for which these goods will be bought. Formally, this statement can be written in the form of an equation, where the value of the gross social product is equal to the sum of workers' wages, capitalist profits, and landowners' rent. This means that these three classes will buy all the goods produced, and overproduction is possible only when the state puts its dirty paw on this market idol and forcibly prevents the market affairs. As an example, food contracts are given, in accordance with which the state destroys imported products in much the same way as American capitalists did during the Great Depression. But no, the overproduction crisis is not accidental. Without it, the market simply cannot maintain a state of equilibrium. Let's see why. And let's start with the criticism of Say's law, which is a very weak and vulnerable theoretical construction at both the micro and macro levels. So, for each individual capitalist, the issue of sales is a key problem. How to guess the desires of consumers, how to make them buy a product and not let them go to a competitor.
Никто за корову цены не давал.
In general, the market-driven economy shows its extreme inefficiency in this matter. The manufacturer first creates the product at its own risk, and only then looks at whether it has found demand from consumers or not. But natural resources and human labor have already been spent on its production. If the goods are unclaimed, they will be wasted, and even turn into waste that pollutes the natural environment. This problem is the first factor that makes the overproduction problem possible. However, Say's law ignores this condition, assuming that all the goods produced will certainly be sold. If we consider this law through the prism of macroeconomic processes, then everything does not work well here either. Even if you imagine that all the products on the market are perfect and satisfy someone's need, this does not mean that the seller of the product will necessarily and immediately spend his income on buying goods from another manufacturer. He can save this money, destroy it, send it abroad. Finally, while a person decides what to do with the received income further, prices in the economy may rise, and he will no longer be able to get back the value equivalent to the one sold. And this is the second factor that makes market overproduction possible. There is another problem. Incomes in the economy are distributed unevenly.
Мужик, мою долю подавай. Ладно, медведюшка, бей, как уговор был. Тебе вершки, а мне корешки.
Simply put, all goods sold are created by the labor of hired workers. However, in the form of wages, they will receive only a fraction of the value they have created. The other part is appropriated by the capitalist. This can be illustrated as follows. The national income of the Russian economy is divided into wages and profits approximately 50-50. However, people employed in Russia make up 93% of the economically active population, and employers about 2%. The rest are self-employed, employees of family businesses, and so on. The capitalist's profit is divided into investment and personal consumption. As a result, each individual owner of capital accumulates personal income, which is several times higher than the income of an ordinary worker. The question arises, where does the capitalist spend this money? Indeed, having an income 10 times more than that of an employee, he physically cannot eat 10 times more sausage, put on 10 pairs of pants at once, and take 10 tablets of analgin. Hypothetically, this can also cause the problem of overproduction, but capitalism has found a way out of this situation. The super profits of the ruling class accumulate in the consumption of luxury goods, paintings, expensive cars, and castles. For example, Rolls-Royce cars are assembled by hand and not by poor Asians, but by highly paid specialists. One of them, for instance, is only engaged in drawing the famous lines along the car body. As a result, such goods have a gigantic exchange value and absorb the part of the social product that the workers did not get. In general, when you see a moneybags on the street in a Bentley, do not rush to send him curses in the back. Perhaps he is trying with all his might to keep the market economy in a state of equilibrium. The processes I have described above only create the possibility of overproduction crisis. But these are subjective factors. They can arise and disappear under certain conditions. And what makes overproduction inevitable? What is the objective side of this process? The answer to this question lies in the law of the fall in the average rate of return, which we described in detail in one of the previous videos. Competition drives the investor along the path of scientific and technological progress, forcing them to reduce labor costs in the production of goods, and therefore its cost. As a result, the return on the production of a unit of goods falls. Put the case that a capitalist used to own a factory for the production of aluminium spoons, which were cast by hand, and sold them at a price twice the cost of raw materials. Thanks to innovations, the growth of the capital-labor ratio, the spoon stamping machine makes production as cheap as possible. This means that the difference in price between aluminium and the spoon made of it, in fact, the gain per unit of production, is reduced to, let us say, 10%. Due to the reduced profitability, the capitalist now has to produce 10 times more of these spoons in order to get the same mass of profit. This is a general rule that pushes investors to expand production in the long run. And it is clearly evident in the dynamics of the return on American capital, which was negative in the post-war decades. However, the drop in profitability is not linear. In the short term, it moves from growth to decline, while maintaining a general downward trend. In the conditions of economic recovery, positive expectations, and the growth of consumer demand, the prices of goods rise above the cost. As a result of the price increase, the rate of profit rises, despite the growth in capital-labor ratio. All this not only allows technically and economically backward producers to stay up, but also contributes to the emergence of new enterprises of this kind on the market. The excessive price over value stimulates the production of goods, since the capitalist, by selling the goods, receives in return more than he gives away. However, under the same conditions, the buyer, on the contrary, is forced to overpay. Thus, effective demand begins to lag behind supply more and more. Since the market economy is by its very nature an unregulated element, there is no such body that would detect the approach of this threat in time and instruct producers to stop. According to the laws of dialectics, the acceleration of quantitative changes turns into qualitative transformations. The market accumulates a critical mass of unsold goods, and economic growth turns into a recession. Products offered at high prices are not in demand. Prices start to fall, followed by the fall of profitability. At the end of the fall phase, the profitability indicator is below the level of the previous bottom, and the economic cycle begins again. Actually, just in order to prevent prices from falling to a level below the value, the capitalists came up with the idea of destroying goods, thereby reducing their supply. However, this of course is not able to solve the problem of overproduction, and only once again emphasizes the bestial nature of the system, where the highest value is profit. It is also worthwhile to say that the transition of capitalism to the growth phase of the rate of profit, which took place in the era of neoliberalism, in fact does not change anything in these relations. Capital was able to reverse the dynamics of profitability only due to the oppression of the interests of workers around the world and the fall in their incomes. Thus, the purchasing power of the population was limited in relation to production to an even greater extent. The growing gap for the time being was plugged by an increase in household debt. But this does not solve the problem of overproduction. It came out the other side and created the biggest financial crisis in history in 2008. The question remains, is there any way to solve the problem of overproduction? Capitalism is trying to do this. In this way, corporations invest heavily in marketing. Its task is not only to determine the real needs of customers, but also to control their behavior, imposing false values of irrational consumption on the society. States are increasingly trying to interfere in the market processes by prohibiting capitalists from disposing of unsold excess supplies. Corporations everywhere use econometric models that allow them to expand planning horizons, more accurately determine the optimal production volumes. Finally, each new crisis ends with an increase in monopolization, when bankrupt enterprises are absorbed by large market players. But all these attempts by capitalism to make its life more predictable and less risky are destroying the very essence of the market, its spontaneous nature and the anarchy of commodity-money relations, which has historically been a key condition for growth for the market. Thus, in order to develop, capitalism must cease to be capitalism, replace the anarchy of commodity-money relations with planning, and private property with public property. This means that you cannot go forward without going towards socialism.